Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of the Breath of Fresh Sports podcast. With you, as always, I am your host, John Piszczek, excited, as always, for another fantastic show. I'm recording this on a Friday, and last night was a pretty big night for sports. The NFL season finally kicked off after a few month-long hiatus, and, we started on schedule. No training camp, no preseason, but we got our first game of the season. Fortunately, we're not going to be talking about that because that game did not live up to expectations, just like most opening day games don't, in my opinion. Instead, we're going to be talking about another NBA playoff game that was played last night between the Los Angeles Lakers and the Houston Rockets. And it was a pretty pivotal game, being that the Rockets' loss dropped them down 3-1 in the series. And for those who don't know, when you're down 3-1 in a series, that's essentially the nail in the coffin, which is pretty ironic to say, being that just a week ago there actually was a team in the Denver Nuggets who rallied from 3-1 to win their series. But once again, that's an outlier for a reason. That happens once every couple of decades, but we've been fortunate enough to witness that twice in our lifetime. But back on topic, the Houston Rockets for a couple consecutive seasons were like the team in the West. And I know it's crazy to say, being that the Golden State Warriors with their super team led by Kevin Durant were also there. But in 2018, Houston, led by James Harden and Chris Paul, won 65 games. They were up 3-2 on Golden State before Chris Paul's injury. And then you fast forward to 2019, they lost some players, but they were almost as good. But once again, they could not beat Golden State in the playoffs. Now, going into the West this regular season, I would say it was about as wide open as it had ever been. You had the question marks surrounding LeBron James and Anthony Davis. The Clippers had set up a brand new team with two new superstars who had never even played for the team yet. Denver Nuggets, they've been young for a while. Utah, everyone knows. I mean, they added Mike Conley. Could that be the final piece for them? And then Golden State, who had been this force in the West for a handful of years, had lost Andre Iguodala, Sean Livingston, Kevin Durant, and Klay Thompson was injured. So suddenly this force that was preventing anyone from succeeding in the West was out of the picture. And when you look at the Houston Rockets and their last couple of seasons, the only thing that prevented them from back-to-back finals appearances was the all-time great Warriors super team led by Kevin Durant and company. With all the question marks in the West, all these new duos, Golden State's injuries, and everything you can think of, if there was a team that should have kept it together and just ran it back in the Western Conference, it was those 2019 Houston Rockets. When the Warriors were fully healthy, even at their absolute best with 4 All-Stars, the only team that ever came close to challenging them was the James Harden Chris Paul Rockets. Golden State was sweeping most teams, blowing them off the court, and it was insane. They were dominating everyone in their path. Until Houston acquired Chris Paul from the Los Angeles Clippers, and suddenly it was an even playing field. Those 2018 Rockets pushed Golden State the full 7 games in the Western Conference Finals. And on top of that, they actually had Golden State on the ropes. Houston led that series 3-2 heading into Game 6. And then, for those who don't know, Chris Paul tweaked his hamstring, and that was all she wrote for the Rockets season. You have to ask yourself, what would have happened if Chris Paul didn't hurt his hamstring? Could the Rockets have actually dethroned the all-time great Warriors? They came back in 2019. This time they lost to the Warriors in 6 with a pretty similar roster. They had lost Trevor Ariza, but outside of that, the rosters were pretty much identical. And then you look at 2019 free agency. Golden State loses Kevin Durant, Andre Iguodala, Livingston, and Klay Thompson, and suddenly the West is wide open. To me, this season was the year that the Rockets should have just gone for it. The only thing stopping their dominance and potentially back-to-back Western Conference titles was the Golden State Warriors. And now that the Warriors were out of the picture, this was the year that Houston should have just kept the squad together and gone for it. Because if there was ever a chance that they could have gotten out of the West, it was this season. But what did they do instead? They traded 2 of their 3 best players. And I think most would have agreed that if they hadn't traded Chris Paul in the offseason, they would have been the favorites to win the Western Conference with all the question marks going on with the duos and the new teams assembled. They would have been the only established team in the West that had actually had chemistry together and been to the postseason together. I just don't understand what Daryl Morey and his staff were thinking this season. You were the only established team in the West. Without Golden State, you were the best team in the West, and you traded 2 of your 3 best players. Chris Paul for Russell Westbrook and Clint Capella for Robert Covington at the trade deadline. To me, that was a championship-costing move for Houston. This was the year to keep the roster together and just go for it. They were good enough. They were good enough for back-to-back seasons, in my opinion. It's just they were good enough right here, and Golden State was potentially the best team of all time up here. The Rockets had a good roster. They had everything you needed. They had a bona fide superstar in James Harden. They had a defensive-minded point guard in Chris Paul. Clint Capella could protect the rim. They have P.J. Tucker to stretch the floor and shoot threes. To me, there was absolutely no reason to break that up. If they hadn't won the conference this year, I would have understood it. Trade Chris Paul, he's getting old. Maybe move on from Capella. He isn't the best offensive player. And then start from scratch. But I don't understand how you can do that. Going into a season like this year, where they had every opportunity to finally get over the hump and make it to the NBA Finals. They were a 65-win team that actually challenged the most dominant team of all time. No one could touch the Warriors, but Houston actually challenged them, pushed them 7 games, pushed them 6 games, was up 3-2 before an injury. I don't understand why you break up that roster, especially when you look at the success that Chris Paul has had in Oklahoma City. He led a very young, not very talented Thunder team to the playoffs, and even pushed this very Rockets team to the full 7 games in the first round. Meanwhile, Russell Westbrook has been hurt and as inefficient as ever in the postseason, which was predictable. I don't know why he seemed to think, when I say he, I mean Daryl Morey, why Russell Westbrook was suddenly going to become this efficient team player. It's not who he is. He is not built for the postseason, and I don't understand in what galaxy he thought Russell Westbrook was an upgrade over Chris Paul, especially after seeing the success that the team had with Chris Paul as their point guard. The West was wide open this year. There was zero reason for Houston to blow it up and make the Westbrook trade. And in the end, I truly do believe that the Russell Westbrook trade, paired with some of their offseason losses like Capella, were championship caliber losses. And I think that if Houston loses this series, which it is very predictable that they will, I think we got to start pointing the finger in Houston and trying to ask, why exactly did you break up that team? Especially for a bigger contract and a more inefficient player like Russell Westbrook is. Thank you all so much for watching. I really do appreciate any kind of support. If you enjoyed that video, you can expect more like it in the coming days or weeks. So thank you so much for watching. As always, I appreciate all the support and have a nice day.